Welcome everybody to the weekly Dalton Collective Hangout, and today we've got a special guest, Pathfinder of DasFed Industries, very special guest. It's here to announce a very cool partnership. So with that, Pathfinder, you might as well introduce yourself and maybe give us an introduction to what it is that Small Computers is all about.
Sure, thanks. Let's see, well, the name I'm normally going by on Urbit is Naltic Warns, and the star that I really started working with a star called DasFab, and for me personally, I was always very interested in at the intersection of Urbit and small computing, because I think part of the philosophy of Urbit around personal sovereignty is it dovetails completely, in my opinion, with the idea of having small, personally owned computing devices. So if with Urbit, just as the software, if you're owning you have true ownership over it, why not also have total ownership over something you can hold in your hand? And also, I've played around with Raspberry Pis for a long time for other things, often in the cryptocurrency world, running different types of full nodes on Raspberry Pis and things like a Monero node, and also doing things like with Tor on Raspberry Pis. It's really fascinating to me. So I got very interested early on in how Urbit could be, can you run it on a Raspberry Pi? And then I met Badr Nidno, and Badr, you've got all, check out all the work you've done with building, these binaries and getting everything running on ARM devices. And so that was very exciting to me. And so what I like to do, I'm less of a programmer, more of a systems integrator and more of a product minded kind of guy. So I like to stick things together and experiment, so and so one of the early things I did was I'll run DasFab on a Pi. Can you do it? What'll happen? I don't know. I like that. So got it up and running, and started the Small Computers group, which is I love it. It's a great group of people. It's amazing folks in there. I think it's almost up to 300 members now, and also thinking of ways of building small computing devices that are not just fun and experimental, but also pretty reliable. So you could reliably use a small Pi-based Urbit for not just your own personal planet, but again, for a star. So provide and hosting groups, things like that. So that's really where I come at it from. And yeah, when you folks asked about Dalton needs a happy place to live, let's form a partnership and look at ways that some of the work that I'm doing with these devices that I have lying around all over the place, how we could work together. So as of right now, Dalton is running on not a Raspberry Pi, but a Nano Pi, which is basically a beefier version of a Raspberry Pi, and it's running on a lot of about a terabyte of NVMe storage and SSD drive, and it's also running on the same hardware as a Bitcoin full node, because why not, right? Why not? And I think the last thing I'll say is that the other thing I'm very fascinated with is this intersection between three things is between Urbit and between small computing and cryptocurrencies. Because once you add cryptocurrencies to the equation, then you have the whole ecosystem is complete. You could have people, personally sovereign individuals on their own personally sovereign hardware that's incredibly portable, being able to exchange currency for services and goods or whatever you can imagine. So that's really where I come at it from. That's about it for me. My room is always normally this dark. There's nothing wrong, and I'm not being punished in a dungeon. I like my study kind of dark.
Nice. All right, so I wanted to try to also speak to just how easy this was. So we spoke probably maybe a week ago in Small Computers. I sort of broached this idea that Dalten could use a new home, meaning a new server to live on. And from the time that we sort of decided to do this to the time you were able to run the thing, it was basically overnight. And that was only because I sent over the file late one evening and you got it the next morning.
And I was asleep early. I went to sleep early.
But the process was really straightforward. So all I had to do was log into the current server where the Dalten Star is hosted, which is a DigitalOcean droplet. Control D, which shuts the thing down gracefully. I wait for that to happen. And then there's a folder which had already been mounted to the Linux file system. But if you do need to, actually, I'm not sure you don't need to do that in order to zip it up. Probably you do. But then there's just a tar command.
You don't actually.
You don't
I don't think.
Yeah, you don't need to mount. You don't need to mount home. You don't have to have it be in Unix. Yeah,
right. It's just the folder, right?
Yeah, just the folder. It's a bucket.
Yeah, the bucket. Yeah. And so you target that bucket, give it a name, and then send that to. And then I sent that to John, and then he was able to use that basically that zip file, point the binary at it, and just pick up exactly where it left off. Almost like taking a hard drive out of one machine and then putting it into another, and then just turning it on, and it just works. I think that's pretty amazing. Like, that's not normal in our normal computing world, right?
It's very special, considering also the nature of how an Urbit is everything it has ever heard. Right? It is everything in its event stream over time, and you're recreating it basically its entire life. Not just its current state, but its whole life was transferred, essentially. Its growth from birth to where it is now. And yeah, it's really nice when everything just works. And literally, all it took for me was just to download it, and then I pulled it onto my local desktop just so I could also have a backup, and then I just SFTP'd it over to the NanoPi, and then just fire it up.
And there it is.
And there it is. And I set up the uptime monitor too, so you can see is it alive? If you can see if both the Dalten Star and the Bitcoin node is happy. So and it's plugged. Also, just so you know too, it is plugged into a. It's funny. It's plugged into a UPS that's literally 20 times as big as the device. So it's like this. It's this tiny thing, and then I just have this huge UPS that I use for different things, and it's plugged in with the NanoPi is plugged into the same UPS with as DOSFEB, which is actually running on a conventional Raspberry Pi 4. The original, that was the first Raspberry Pi I started fooling around with Urbit. But both of them are plugged into that UPS, and it's always fun. Like if the power ever goes out, it says, how much time, the countdown, and it's always like, oh my God, I only have 2,000 minutes. What? Because that's all it's doing is it's powering those little devices. So if power goes out, it'll be safe as long as the power doesn't stay out for like a day or two.
Nice. So with that monitoring you were talking about, so that is pretty important for infrastructure nodes on Urbit, which is to say they need to be able to route packets or do peer discovery for their children, right? So Dalten doesn't have any dependence right now, but DOSFEB certainly does. In fact, if I read the blockchain correctly, I think it might be the most. DOSFEB might have the most transfers, meaning like people leaving one sponsor to go to another sponsor of any other sponsor out there.
Wow. I didn't know that.
I'd have to actually look at it. Like I was just kind of streaming through to see what it was. It's like 14 or 15 sponsors have joined DOSFEB away from their existing sponsor, which I don't think is very common at all right now.
Yeah, that's true.
So what does it mean to be running a small computer that has responsibility for you? What does that mean?
Well, first of all, I think it's all bundled up with the whole personal sovereignty equation, right? So if you're going to assert your personal sovereignty for anything, you have responsibility, originally, really just, to yourself, like with cryptocurrency, my keys I'm responsible for I am my own bank. Oh my God, I have to take care of my own private keys. The same with Urbit. You're taking care of your own private keys. Your azimuth points on Ethereum. But I think so for me, it's just a matter of thinking through both the what you think will happen, and also thinking through like the worst case scenarios. so I always just think like, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? It's like, okay, and having some redundancy and things like that. And I think probably the most important thing around responsibilities, in my opinion, are around for infrastructure nodes is around transparency and accessibility for the people who depend on it. So one of the things that bothers me intensely is when people will buy an Urbit planet and then they spin it up and their star is dead. And it's so confusing to them, and you see them occasionally popping up in your Urbit community groups, and they think they've done something wrong, right? Because Urbit's a little complicated spinning it up on your own, especially for people who have never looked at a command line. And but it's amazing how many people will go through the process and they're motivated. And so I think one of the most important things, and I would love to see this in the future somehow, with wherever planets are being sold, like, is there a way that you can check to see if your star is okay? And also, how do you check it? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? I think that's really critical too. So, what I would love to see in the future, I'm just thinking out loud, is maybe some way of, maybe just within Urbit itself, some way of helping people overcome that. Because right now it all has to be channels outside of Urbit. It's like, okay, how do you check on, DOS? Well, you can find out that I run it. How do you find that out? Well, you have to kind of ask people, or you have to know to go to Google and search for DOSFeb, and then you'll find the Twitter account, and then you'll find the website, and then you'll.
Yeah, I mean, but you can imagine like somebody just providing a service where they you could just like provide like an interface and it pokes the ship, and then it then sends a hi, and it'll say
Yeah, I mean it would be interesting if maybe a person could just create like, I will be the star checker service for anyone who's interested or something.
It's like the things that is the site down for me, or just but for Urbit planets.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, because
it's
not just you. It's really down.
Yeah, because like the is active isn't sufficient, because it might have been booted in the past, but that doesn't mean it's been booted now or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think for me it all comes to two things. It comes to it's around the responsibility is around being transparent and accessible to people in an ongoing fashion as infrastructure. If there's ever an issue with DOSFeb, people know where to check and also how to contact me. And then, but then also just like with the booting up process, when people are creating their first entry into, when they're coming in to discover the Urbit territory. I like calling it a territory from that recent blog post, the Urbit territory. Making it as smooth as possible so that they know, when you are starting up a planet, you have certain infrastructure you're depending on for your OTAs, your over the air updates, and making that as smooth as possible, because I think a lot about the new user experience too, because the product part of my brain kind of goes off, and I think about how beautiful it is to see so many highly motivated people, walking through the mud to get all of this working. And I think Talon's hosting is a great way to help people overcome that. And I also don't think I believe in these personally sovereign devices and hardware and things like that, but I also think there's a place in the whole ecosystem for hosted solutions as well. I think that's important. So I really like what Talon is doing, but with the making it very easy, almost very turnkey kind of way for people to just go to a website and go, yeah, I want to. Oh, here we go. I'm all set.
Mm-hmm. One thing I was thinking about this afternoon, now that Web Dojo it's now kind of transformed into Terminal on Landscape, on the latest, which is it's basically a full-featured command line interface on the web now, which it really wasn't before and now is. So it's far more like useful than it had been previously. And this opens up possibilities for folks that are hosted to even have tools inside of their Urbit that their hosts like don't need to worry about. So one instance or one thing that you might need to worry about is like, can I download my data in some reasonably efficient way, because my host might be able to block that access because I don't have access, for example, to that Raspberry Pi, right? But I do have access to the shell, meaning through the terminal. Now you could also imagine that there'd be some sort of like, like command you could run, which does basically two things: make a download of your peer file available. Now this is probably slightly tricky because this is like, okay, which process is making it available? So it might have to be something kind of weird. But anyway, let's just follow with me. Imagine you can go into the terminal, make some command, which would shut down the Urbit, make a download available without even contacting the host at all, such that you could leave, and then also sort of like destroy it after it's left, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So it couldn't be rebooted again. I think that would be particularly interesting in terms of like hosted solutions, but also still sovereignty.
Yeah, I like that. That'd be interesting.
I'm not actually sure it's possible, but it sounds.
Who knows? I mean, I love working in this whole Urbit ecosystem, because a lot of times the answer is I don't know, maybe. But someone said like, how many? Someone said the other day, so how DOSFeb's, how many? It's sponsoring like almost 30 planets now. Like, how many? What's the maximum? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. And like, well, aren't you worried? I'm like, no, I think it's awesome that I don't know. I'm monitoring things. I'm saying, okay, I can tell from the disk activity and the CPU usage, and I'll be, these other variables. Like, okay, I'm at DOSFeb right now is at maybe like 30%. Like it's using 30% of its resources, and so. Will it be as more planets are added, will it kind of go up like this, or will it go up like this? Will it be exponential? Will it be logarithmic? Will it be geometric? I don't know, but I'll keep monitoring it. But I think it's fascinating to in particular with Urbit, how many times, the answer is just, I'm not sure. Let's find out.
Mm-hmm. And another thing there too, like you said, the small computers group is up to roughly 300 people or so. The Urbit community group is something like 2,000, but it's still relatively early days in Urbit, and so the community aspect of this is somewhat critical, really, to our sort of success. And could you speak to how do you think, or how do you see sort of community development continue to happen on Urbit, and what its role is, as opposed to something like we might see in like other social networks where they're more public by default, whereas they're certainly different.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's an interesting dynamic tension between two things here, right? So, it's well, first of all, the communities are when things work right, they are the things that drive the innovation for the product or platform or whatever it is, because of their feedback, and they use things in ways developers never expected them to be used, and then suddenly something grows and it's something amazing. This feedback loop, the sort of classic product feedback loop with your customers and your community of customers. And you want to also build a community of customers too, because then they help you do things like customer support, and also help you help you answer questions before they're asked to the people who are building the thing or whatever it is. And with right now, the dynamic tension is that, this is all experimental, and stuff is just going to change because we're just building it. It's so brand new. And at the same time, it's like, but we still need to have an active community in here. And so we need to give them tools that they can rely on to build communities. But those tools, we might break them all of a sudden, because suddenly we'll do something like, oh yeah, notifications. Yeah, that's not working right now. So you just have to kind of stand there and look at the tiles like John Travolta, he's looking around like, what? I made a meme for that. It's like that feeling when you're checking, you're like, what group what channel is there a message? I'll click on that and we'll see. So you're trying to keep the community working in the platform as you're changing the platform. and changing the community tools. And sometimes you break things that make it very hard for the community to keep doing its thing. And every once in a while, you'll see these cycles in Urbit. It's interesting where like something breaks and it's like, gee, it got really quiet around here. It's like, that's because people don't know how to, they're not able to check the notifications. Like they've forgotten that they joined this thing, and it's not, the UI and the UX changed a little bit. So I think, it's interesting, that loop.
Sorry. I mean, what's really like neat about that is like also that like just like the way that like it's like an OS that never turns off, and so it's like it gets upgraded like live, and so like all the like the applications on all the ships, it's like all the actions need to be the same, and like their states need to be compatible, like the way they send updates needs to be compatible. And so when it gets rolled out, it's like it's very much like I don't know. I actually saw a video. I think it might have actually been posted in relationship to Urbit. I don't know, but it was like, I don't know. It was like Indonesia or something, and people had like those tuk-tuks like with like the sort of like tricycle taxi things. And they're like driving, like as a motor and stuff. And they're like driving, and they're like tilted all to the side and riding on two wheels. And like the other guy is like, like removing the wheel and then like adding a new wheel on, and like, wrenching it on, like all while they're driving, and, or there's another one too where there's like this plane, like the propeller shuts off and they're like in the sky and they're just very calmly like
just get in there and fix it real time.
Yeah.
It's the last thing that's interesting to me around this fundamental thing is that in my experience, right now it's not a closed community, it's just it's a frontier community. That's what it is. And by frontier, that means, this is you can die out here. You just do the wrong thing, and like, and your wheel fell off your wagon, and there's no AAA. You just kind of like got to make a new wheel from that tree over there, or you die. Or if you're lucky, someone comes along and helps you out. And so that's the frontier community, and so it's hard. It's a bit unforgiving sometimes. It's like, so you started up your Urbit on two machines at the same time? Yeah, so let's talk about breaching. This is what you're gonna have. All those groups that you belong to? Yeah, so they're gone. Are you ready for this? They're gone, and you won't know which groups you belong to because there's no record of them because you blew it out of the water. And the data's in there, but you'd have to kind of like dig in there with these tools, and you've never used a command line. Okay, well, so anyway, it's a bit unforgiving, but the right amount of unforgivingness makes communities much stronger. It's like a selective pressure on a species, right? A selective pressure, not one that's going to kill the species, but a slight selective pressure will make species, evolve over time. And the idea is, you keep that delicate balance. The frontier is just frontiery enough and unforgiving enough so that it keeps people kind of on their toes, and they learn to be more adaptive. It doesn't scare everyone away. It doesn't kill everyone. It just makes people a little more adaptive. So I think one of the key things we can do in the future is just see how long we can keep the way it is now. I love how it is right now. It's just that sort of right level of, in my opinion, of unforgiving frontier-ishness. And but at the same time, the longer goal is, right, like we want everyone in the world to be able to run these things and use these tools. And so I think, part of the beautiful thing with that is part of the responsibility. The bulk of the responsibility for that is really on all of us, the people who are not just the people developing the code, but the people who are then taking the code and, doing things, some of the stuff like I'm doing, like I'm not actually writing code, but I'm doing different things and introducing new people to the system based on, and it's all just community bootstrapping. So I think, you don't see, the other communities, online right now, they're mostly, the communities are really just products. Like you are the product because they're real customers. It's a company, Facebook is a company and their customers are advertisers, and the community and the social network is the product. And with Urbit, it's not that at all. The equation is completely inverted. and that's an awesome thing, you know.
So you've probably been around online for a while. Like I got my first email address in 1996, for example, and which is also, I mean, I don't go back all the way back into the 80s, but at least in the early 90s, some of my first online experiences were not of the web. I mean, the web was a pretty awful place, meaning it didn't have, there was just nothing there. Like, sure, I could go to a corporate website, but that wasn't very interesting. Like, what was interesting was like in the early days of CompuServe and Prodigy and AOL were the the chat groups that you could go to, or the message boards that you could read about, or just sort of news that was all very containerized. And I was reflecting on that. It feels a lot like what Urbit feels like now. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, does it feel like it's different this time? Or how does it feel remembering back to those sort of early days of the internet?
Well, I talked about this, I think, a lot on the Stack podcast, which was a lot of fun. But it's a recurring thing. Is for me, it's the era of bulletin board systems, of BBSs, right? So when I was a youngster, when I was a really young kid, that's what my first introduction to online communities were dial-up bulletin board systems, dial-up BBSs, and the thing there is that it was fantastic because you had these systems, like you had to build your own computer and run your own bulletin board system on your own computer and plug your phone into it, and people would call into your machine. And sometimes your machine would do something like distribute. There was something called FidoNet, which would basically a way for bulletin boards to talk to each other and share messages in a network sharing. So basically you could go to one board and you could see FidoNet messages from multiple bulletin boards. And so, you are talking through your machine to other machines, and then the machines were also just talking to each other and sharing threads of conversation. So for me, like, that was some of the best online communities grew out of that environment, because it was a frontier environment. Everyone was personally, there was personal sovereignty involved completely, and it was just difficult enough, and just frontiery. Is that a word? Frontierishness? I don't know. It's like just unforgiving enough that it had that nice kind of selective pressure to make people kind of go, I'm going to motivate myself even more. So, like what's happened now, it's funny because in some ways Urbit has come full circle back. It's like, yeah, it's kind of like running a bulletin board system. I'm hosting a group where people are talking to each other, and all those people and the data, it's happening on that machine on my desk. And okay, that's pretty cool. But but then Urbit adds a whole other layer to it, because of its it's so much. It's it has. It's like, what is this? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? And so it's rhyming like BBS's, but it's not the same tune. It's not the same. It's similar. And I think, a big part of what's different this time is that it's rhyming again like those early days, but we've seen what happens when it all goes bad, because everyone's living it right now. You don't talk to your friends on Facebook. You talk to Facebook, the company, and then they kind of pass on your messages to other people who are also talking to Facebook. And in the meantime, you are being monetized because you are the product, and Facebook's customers are advertisers, and YouTube's customers are advertisers, and Twitter's customers are becoming advertisers. And so you have that dystopia where it's like, wow, it's not only not my data, it's not even my identity. Also, you also have this, like, your identities are just fluid. It's like you are an email address. That's ridiculous. And so you have no sense of ownership over your identity, because if Facebook deletes everything that's on Facebook of me, then that means that identity is gone of me. And so you see the productization of people, the destruction of identity, and the best one, the third one for the trifecta, right, is the censorship. It's the, like, we don't want you to post that. we don't like what you've said. We're going to delete you because of what you said. Or even worse, I mean, the deleting is the mildest form of censorship, the deletion of your account. The worst kind of deletion is the subtle editing of what you say and see, right? It boggles my mind how subtly you can influence what pops up on your feed and how many people see what you share. And it's all controlled by third parties who are doing it for who knows what reasons. Sometimes, people, they're doing it because they don't know any better. They're trying to avoid being sued. And sometimes they're doing it for who knows what bad actors are deciding to censor and tailor the information. I hate these intermediaries. It's a common theme for me has always been disintermediation. Right? And Urbit is the ultimate in disintermediation and personal sovereignty. It's just like, I don't like what you say. There's no way for me to stop you saying it at all. I don't like who you are. There's no way for me to destroy you. No one can destroy Dalten, right? You can't put it out of business. People could choose to not pay attention to Dalten, but that would be an individual basis. Every individual would choose on their own to decide whether or not to interact with Dalten Star or pay attention to the groups or whatever, or pay attention to a human being behind an identity like Meltic Werns, like me. So it's different. It's new, and it's similar in rhyming, but it's also totally different. The more I get involved in Urbit, the more clear the current state of dystopia becomes, because everyone naturally gets a little bit numb to anything that keeps hitting you, right? And I'm realizing, like, I've always known this has been pretty bad, but I just kind of grew numb to it until I started realizing the possibilities of a platform and an ecosystem like Urbit can bring to it. So,
well, thanks very much, John. I really appreciate you, all the work that you've done in the community, and especially the memes. The memes are so good, man.
Oh, you like them? Thank you.
I love the memes. And before we sign off for today, I do want to make sort of an announcement. There is going to be a network breach. It is coming. That will likely be the week of the 6th of December. That somewhere in there, probably the 7th or 8th. It's not really super clear yet. There's going to be a blog post hitting on urbit.org today with more details. The big difference between this network breach and old network breaches is there will be migration tools available. So fingers crossed, like, you deploy those tools, use those tools, and your stuff will come with you to the other side, which is really, really good. We're at the place now where if the entire network was erased overnight, it would be pretty terrible. But this is going to allow the team to introduce some pretty fundamental changes to the sort of the lowest level of the system. But it comes at a cost, and what that cost is this idea of breach. And for anybody watching who doesn't know what a breach is, it's basically like erasing the hard drive and starting over. But this is going to happen to the entire network all at once. It's a pretty big deal. I've been through one of these, and I've been on Urbit for a year and a half, I think, maybe 2, and it felt pretty traumatic even then. So this one could be a pretty big deal. But we're going to start communicating that out. But I wanted to make sure I at least put that out there before we closed. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again next week.